All right, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us here today. My name is Brandon Clifford, Senior Vice President of Franchise Development here at HomeWell Care Services. I'm really excited to continue the conversation we began a few weeks ago, talking about caregiver recruitment and kind of going into retention today. I mean, we all know we've talked about there's two main engines that kind of drive this business. There's your sales engine, someone out in the local market, constantly, generating leads and interest and building the HomeWell brand in your local area. And then there's the recruitment and retention engine, someone who's focused on not just finding caregivers, although that's very important, but also retaining the caregivers and keeping them once you have them, right? And so that's the topic of conversation today. Per usual, this shouldn't take super long. I have some slides that we're going to go through. If you have questions, please, feel free to raise your hand. Or type it in, or even send it via email to your franchise development director at the end of the call. And they'll follow up with you and go into any specifics you might have. We're gonna try to keep this to under 30 minutes. It's being recorded, and we will upload it and send it to all of you guys afterwards as well. So, to kind of refresh everybody's memory, this slide was actually on our last conversation too, to kind of talk about what that engine looks like, right? And then we'll get into some specifics about why retaining caregivers are so important today, right? And so I talked about that sales engine, and the recruiting engine is going to look sort of like this, where you're going to have a lot of different avenues through which caregivers are going to approach you. We went over that last time, whether it's the internet, it's on your website, Indeed, referrals, which if you guys remember, those are really, really great ones, referrals from your existing caregivers. Lots of different places they're going to come through. But you need to have a smooth onboarding process to kind of keep that engine churning. And your goal is to get them out on a shift, working with that first client within 7 days. So again, just a hypothetical situation. Let's say Thursdays is your interview day, right? So your HR manager is going to be pre-screening people and gathering all those applicants and having them come into the office or via Zoom do an initial interview on a Thursday, right? You're gonna, after you meet those caregivers face to face and you feel like they're going to be a good fit for your agency, you hire them on a Friday, right? With the goal of them coming in for an orientation on Monday. In the meantime, you're doing reference checks, you run their background check. You want to take them through a really great orientation, which we're going to talk about a little bit today. And that gives you a little bit of time to get those background checks back, to check their references, and have them complete a little bit of initial training so that when they go out and get that staffed on that first shift, they have at least a base of knowledge. Even if they tell you they have experience, you want to train them like they have none. So that's a whole nother conversation. So, but why is it important to have this machine, really churning, this engine really churning? It's because caregiver turnover happens, right? This industry, you're seeing right here, this data is from the Home Care Pulse benchmarking study. Over the last 5 years, we're showing caregiver turnover right about 65%, right? And like that might seem high, right? It might seem like a large number to some of you, but what I want to make sure that we understand is that caregiver turnover, it's something that's just the nature of the industry, and it's really kind of remained flat. Other than that one blip in 2018 where it jumped up to 81%. It's you hear a lot in the restaurant space today, or even in the retail world, about how hard it is to find employees. And home care, as home care agency owners, it's been the same for us. We've always been dealing with this, right? So we have a lot of systems and tools and processes in place to help you, but it's still something important to understand that caregivers don't, work for you and then leave and go work for someone else because they're flaky or they're not loyal or we got to get rid of all those negative thoughts, get them all out of your mind. Really, what I like to say is it's more of a transient workforce, okay? And what that means by is, they might only be working for you to fill a small gap during, the school year, right? When kids are at school, moms, they might be able to work for you. And then in the summer, they can't work for you anymore because their kids are home from school, right? There's an example. Or maybe they're a nursing student who is working for you because they're going to a nursing school in your area, and then they graduate from college and they move back home. So that's a turnover, but they didn't just leave you, right? So while the turnover can seem quote unquote high, that's why it's important to have a really strong system and a really, really good process and engine in place that's going to be able to replace those caregivers on an ongoing basis. All right. Another reason why it's important to have that engine going is because finding a caregiver is expensive, right? It's going to cost you money. All right. So these are the caregiver acquisition costs for 2021, again, according to the Home Care Pulse benchmarking study, of what it costs in terms of advertising dollars and, to bring in a caregiver. Now, in our last conversation, we talked about the revenue that a caregiver can produce, right? Like what the average revenue per caregiver is. You should definitely reference that. It was right around, $15,000 on the low end and 50,000 on the high end. So obviously it's an investment worth making. But if you lose that caregiver today, you're going to replace them, right? And as you see, what I think kind of jumps out here is this is based on caregivers employed. The larger your agency gets, the lower your cost of acquisition becomes. And I would say that that's probably, two things. Number one, sales cures all, right? If you have more shifts for your caregivers, they're not going to leave you because you're fulfilling their needs in terms of income earned and hours that they want to work. But number two, I bet a lot of referrals are coming in from your existing caregivers, right? So if you build that bench, you build that culture that we talked about on our last conversation, that cost of acquiring a caregiver is a lot lower because you don't have to run a million Facebook ads or have listings on Indeed.com to get that caregiver, and your costs will come down. Same thing follows suits for in terms of percentage, turnover. When you get to that agency size where you have consistent shift and a really good, strong culture and community of caregivers, that 126 caregivers employed plus, the caregiver turnover comes down pretty dramatically, right? Because now you're building that community, and that's what we really are setting out to do, to where your caregivers come to work for HomeWell because they want to be a part of something, right? They understand your why. They want to help you, help seniors live longer, healthier lives at home, and they want to be a part of something larger than themselves. And then that's what gets them to stay too. They become ingrained in that community. The other caregivers, are their friends, and then because it becomes this great culture where it's a bunch of like-minded people really making a difference in a local market. So how do we do that, right? It's easier said than done. And of course, when you get into training, once you sign your franchise agreement, this is going to get unpacked, and there's so many different elements to this program that we have that takes a concerted effort. It's ongoing, it's always evolving, but we're going to set you up for success so that you and your team can do everything you can to become the employer of choice in your local market, right? So our operations team has built this signature program called the HomeWell Talent Management Program, which is designed to do just that. It's intentional. There's a lot of layers to it, and they're always keeping tabs on it and changing it, different things to not just help you find caregivers, not just help you orientate and train those caregivers, but then how to keep them, right? How to continue to mentor them, supervise them, engage them with a career ladder that allows them to move up within your organization, and hopefully, kind of turn those numbers on the head sooner than later, and get those caregiver retention numbers way lower, the percentage of turnover way lower. So we'll go through these really quickly of what each of these pillars kind of cover. And again, once you get into training, we spend a whole day on each one of these, so you got a lot more coming in the future. So the first one is attracting and recruiting. I know I talked about this on the last conversation a little bit, so I'm going to go pretty quickly over it. But in order to retain a caregiver, you got to have one first, right? So we're going to show you all the different avenues of where to advertise. We're going to show you how to make touches, building your employment referral program, the different tools you can do to pre-screen them and kind of cultivate more caregivers. It's almost like building a sales funnel. But instead of acquiring clients, you're acquiring caregivers, right? Now, then once you have them, you have to have the thing that sets HomeWell owners, in my opinion, apart from a lot of independent owners in their local market is orientation. And the owners that do a better job with their orientation, with taking this program and implementing it the right way in their local market, they're the ones that when you call on your validation calls, they say they don't have a problem finding caregivers. And it's because they build the culture from day one. They do a great job of explaining their why they got into this business. They do a great job of letting the caregivers know that their business means nothing without them. They're the difference. They're the difference in your local market. They're the ones who the clients are going to stand by. They're going to have loyalty to those caregivers. So our agency owners that lead with that in orientation are the ones that set themselves apart from other agencies who, I know it sounds simple, but they kind of overlook those caregivers oftentimes, and they focus just on the clients, where at the end of the day, the caregiver sort of is your client, right? So then once you have them, and you have them in your system and you're getting them out on a shift, the way a lot of people lose caregivers is that now it's like, okay, this person's working, they have their shift, and I'm just going to leave them alone. You can't do that, right? You have to continue to mentor and supervise and have someone in your office who's in charge of this, right? So we highly recommend that every market, whether some states dictate and it's enforced, but even if it's not part of the rules and regulations, to have an RN on staff, someone who has a higher level of understanding of what clients need, who can then mentor and supervise your caregivers. We call it the care manager, right? So they're going to focus a lot on building the relationship with the caregivers. They're going to be sending weekly text messages, or making phone calls to not just make sure, obviously you're going to do that with your clients and make sure the client's happy. This person's job is to make sure the caregiver's happy, right? How are things going at Mr. Smith's house? You've worked 3 shifts there. Do you feel comfortable there? Is everybody safe? Like little things like that. Getting to know them on a personal level, building that rapport. So then that way, if something happens and in a changing condition happens, and maybe Mr. Smith has to move into a facility, that caregiver still wants to work for you because they're part of the team, right? And then even ongoing supervision, having your care manager show up, not just for a warm handoff to the caregiver, but showing up unannounced 3 months down the road at the client's home, just to make sure that everything's going according to plan, that the caregiver is not just text messaging or in one room watching TV while the client is in the other room watching TV. You want to make sure that the care plan is being implemented, and that you're helping people actually live longer, healthier lives and get better, not just babysitting, right? And then long term, your goal is to engage and retain these caregivers, right? We talked about the cost of finding a new caregiver. It costs you money, right? If you have someone leave, you have to replace them. And then you run the risk if that caregiver is unhappy for whatever reason, or does move on to another job, and the client is loyal to that caregiver, you run the risk of losing a client too, right? So you want to make sure you're showing your appreciation. We encourage all of our franchisees to do a caregiver of the month, right? Post it on social media. Recognize them though the way they want to be recognized. Not everyone drinks coffee, right? If they're not a coffee drinker, don't give them a Dunkin' Donuts gift card, right? Recognize them, find out, would they rather have a gas gift card, or what's their favorite store, or figure out a way that's going to recognize them, that's going to make them feel good and feel a valued part of the team. And then one thing we try to do on a corporate level is we give out what's called the Heart of HomeWell Award every single year at conference, to really recognize a singular caregiver who goes above and beyond in their local market. And every franchisee has the opportunity to nominate caregivers. It gets really difficult. The executive leadership team will read through all the nominees and try to narrow it down. This year we narrowed it down to 3 people, and then we had the entire corporate team vote on who was going to be recognized as the Heart of HomeWell. Fantastic story. We can probably send you the video of it if it's something that you wanted to see on your own time. But yeah, it's just a way for us to lead from, as an example, that at the end of the day, the lifeblood of this business is your caregivers, right? And because without the caregiver, you can't accept the client, right? So that's all I had for you guys today. And just like the last conversation, we talked about recruiting caregivers, retaining them. It's all about consistency, right? And this isn't all on you. You as the business owner really isn't the one who should be. You have to drive the consistency and you have to hold someone accountable. We want you to find that care manager who's going to implement it. And then you have our backing, you have your franchise business coach, you have our training that they can plug into to make sure they're doing it the right way. So like I said, I wanted to keep this relatively short. I kept it to 20 minutes or 18 minutes, I guess. I hope you guys found some value out of this. And as usual, please stick by your franchise development director, whether you're working with Christina or Mike or Dan or John or whoever it might be, send in your questions and hopefully we can get them answered. So, all right, Sam, anything else before we say goodbye?
Nope. No one's asked any questions or raised hands. Does anybody have any other questions before we wrap up for the day?
Yeah, feel free to unmute yourself if you want, Rich or Eric, if you have any questions. I know I went through that stuff relatively quick. Awesome. Cool. All right. Well, thank you guys. Oh, are you just waving, Erica? Is that what that is? I think she's just giving me a high
I was
five.
clapping for a good presentation.
Awesome. I'll
Thank
take the
you.
recognition. Thank you so much. All right. Well, you guys have a great day. Like I said, stick by your development director and have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. Talk to you
Thank you
Thank you
so
all.
much. Have a great afternoon on purpose.
soon. Bye.